Well, even the turnpike, their scammers out on the turnpike wanting money for the turnpike.
Oh my gosh. Don't fall for that.
Right.
Do not fall for that. They will bill you direct if you don't have a bike pass.
Yeah.
And it doesn't read it.
Yeah, or else you automatically have it paid or something, yeah. Yeah, I told Dana that. She says, I'm okay. I'm auto pay.
Okay, we're live.
We're live. Good. I can hear it. I don't hear it. They ought to be here.
They know we're here.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Okay. If you remember, we did not cover the last verse of Hosea 11 on Wednesday, if you were here. So, Hosea 11:12 through 12:14. So basically all of chapter 12 with one verse tacked on. And yeah, we're just going to go ahead and read all of this, even though we're sort of breaking this down a little bit at a time. So I'll just go ahead and start in 11:12. Ephraim has encircled me with lies, and the house of Israel with deceit. But Judah still walks with God, even with the one who is faithful. Ephraim feeds on the wind and pursues the east wind. He daily increases lives in desolation. Also, they make a covenant with the Assyrians, and oil is carried to Egypt. The Lord also brings a charge against Judah and will punish Judah according to his ways. According to his deeds, he will recompense him. He took his brother by the heel in the womb, and in his strength he struggled with God. Yes, he struggled with the angel and prevailed. He wept and sought favor from him. He found him in Bethel, and there he spoke to us. That is the Lord God of hosts. The Lord is his memorable name. So you, by the help of your God, return. Observe mercy and justice, and wait on your God continually. A cunning Canaanite, deceitful scales are in his hands. He loves to oppress, and Ephraim said, Surely I have become rich. I have found wealth for myself in all my labors. They shall find in me no iniquity that is sin. But I am the Lord your God, ever since the land of Egypt. I will again make you dwell in tents, as in the days of the appointed feast. I have also spoken by the prophets, and have multiplied visions. I have given symbols through the witness of the prophets. Though Gilead has idols, surely they are vanity. Though they sacrifice bulls in Gilgal, indeed their altars shall be heaps in the furrows of the field. Jacob fled to the country of Syria. Israel served for a spouse, and for a wife he tended sheep. But by a prophet the Lord brought Israel out of Egypt, and by a prophet he was preserved. Ephraim provoked him to anger most bitterly. Therefore his Lord will leave the guilt of his bloodshed upon him, and return his reproach upon him. So, okay, hopefully your handout is correct. Mine isn't as faded as yours is. Mine just has these weird sort of almost like lines going through some of the sentences, but it's not necessarily faded.
You want mine just in case it's better than yours?
No, I was...
Are you sure?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. But hopefully everything got on there that's supposed to be on there. I think it's probably just a printing issue. But anyway, so the first blank that we have, this is best understood as calling out both Israel and Judah. The New King James translates 11:12 as Ephraim has encircled me with lies, the house of Israel with deceit, but Judah still walks with God. But really, the NIV is closer to the mark, and it translates it, and Judah is unruly against God, even against the faithful Holy One. So it's calling out both Israel or Ephraim and Judah. Judah's not going to get off that easy, unfortunately. So, got a list of kings. If you are just really well versed in your, Chronicles of the Kings, yeah, they're all from Judah. I talked a lot, several times, about, what was going on politically in the Northern Kingdom. The rapid secession of power and the rapid changes in foreign policy. And I thought, since it does talk about Judah, and if the NIV is correct and it's not condoning Judah but actually condemning them along with Israel, and saying, hey, Judah also is unruly against God. They also are against the faithful Holy One. I thought, well, we should kind of talk about what was the political situation like in Judah, and were they really as unruly against God as Hosea makes them out to be? So first, we have Uzziah. So you got A, B, or for the last one, Hezekiah, A, B, C. All I have that is highlighted is just verse notations, but you are free to write down whatever you want here, obviously. But the first verse notation for Uzziah, the first king, is 2 Chronicles 26, verses 3 through 5. So I'll read that and then say the verse notation again in case you missed it. But Uzziah was 16 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 52 years. His mother's name was Jechaliah. She was from Jerusalem. And he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father Amaziah had done. He sought God during the days of Zechariah, who instructed him in the fear of God. As long as he sought the Lord, God gave him success. So Uzziah so far, he's a pretty good guy. That was 2 Chronicles 26, 3 through 5, by the way, in case you missed that. And then B, our second reference, it's almost the same. It is still 2 Chronicles 26, but it's 2 Chronicles 26, 16 through 21. And this is sort of where things start to turn for Uzziah, and maybe he's not as God-fearing as he once was. So it says, but after Uzziah became powerful, his pride led to his downfall. He was unfaithful to the Lord his God and entered the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense. While I'm at it, just go ahead and turn to 2 Chronicles, because all of these notations are from 2 Chronicles, so just go ahead and turn to 2 Chronicles 26 if you want. They're all within a couple chapters of each other. Wait till the pages stop flipping.
Yes, please. Look up the right name. I'll help.
Back in 1913, or 2013, sorry, I looked at this on the very same day in the very same month.
Really?
Yeah.
June
that's kind of a
2nd?
coincidence. I usually date it when I study.
Yeah.
Very same
If
day.
you've been keeping all of these, I usually put the date on the top. Sometimes I miss it, but I usually put the date on the top. So you can always know, we went through Hosea 12 and June 2nd. Anyway, 2 Chronicles 26, 16 through 21. After Uzziah became powerful, his pride led to his downfall. He was unfaithful to the Lord his God and entered the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense. Azariah the priest, with 80 other courageous priests of the Lord, followed him in. They confronted King Uzziah and said, "It is not right for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord. That is for the priests, the descendants of Aaron, who have been consecrated to burn incense. Leave the sanctuary, for you have been unfaithful, and you will not be honored by the Lord God." Uzziah, who had a censer in his hand ready to burn incense, became angry. And while he was raging at the priests in their presence before the incense altar in the Lord's temple, leprosy broke out on his forehead. When Azariah the chief priest and all the other priests looked at him, they saw that he had leprosy on his forehead, so they hurried him out. Indeed, he himself was eager to leave, because the Lord had afflicted him. King Uzziah had leprosy until the day he died. He lived in a separate house, leprous, and banned from the temple of the Lord. Jotham his son had charge of the palace and governed the people of the land. So, it talks about the reason these specific kings are the ones we're mentioning, by the way, just in case you missed this. These are the kings of the southern kingdom mentioned in the prologue of Hosea, in Hosea 1:1. Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. So that's why we're going over these specifically. So in 11:12 it talks about, hey, Judah still is unruly against God. They're against the faithful Holy One. In the time of Uzziah, that was the case. At least in the later part of Uzziah's life. Got the, desecrating the temple, basically. They tell him, that is for the priests, the descendants of Aaron. And he basically says, I don't care, which we've kind of heard that before with Jeroboam of the north. He had a similar attitude, and we see how that has played out. Second, we have Jotham. Your first verse, 2 Chronicles 27, verses 1 and 2. So should just be either the same page or maybe one page over if you flip to 2 Chronicles. But 27 verses 1 and 2. It says, Jotham was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. His mother's name was Jerusha, daughter of Zadok. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father Uzziah had done. But unlike his father, he did not enter the temple of the Lord. The people, however, continued their corrupt practices. And I think that's very interesting. You have here a king who walked with the Lord, like Uzziah, but unlike Uzziah, didn't just do whatever he wanted to at the temple, right? He understood the proper mode, the proper manner of worship, like we've been talking about. But the common folk, however, they didn't follow. So, talk a lot about the top-down problem, but Jotham, he tried, but the people did not follow. Uzziah, the people were unruly against God. In Jotham's time, they were unruly against God as well, even though Jotham was a good king. Your second verse there is 2 Chronicles 27, verse 6. So only skipping about 4 verses. And that says, Jotham grew powerful because he walked steadfastly before the Lord his God. So all we have is good things to say about Jotham for the most part. People under him, not so much.
But over in 2 Kings, it has something else to say about him.
Read it.
It says, Uzziah, however, the high places were not removed. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places.
Yeah, talking about the days of Jotham. Yeah. So
he wasn't all good. Everything he did wasn't good. That was bad because those were idol worshiping places.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't tear down he didn't start a massive religious,
like a crusade.
Yeah, what's the word I'm looking for? Reform in the same way that Hezekiah will later on. But the Bible still definitely says, he, walked with the Lord and, grew powerful because he walked steadfastly before the Lord. Obviously, when I say he was a good king, I'm not saying that every single thing he did was good or that he never did anything wrong.
It sounds like it. If you don't go back over there and read there.
But it wasn't necessarily the king that was disobeying, it was the people, but he was not chastising the people for disobeying.
Yeah, the problem is that he allowed the altars to remain to begin with, as opposed to being like Hezekiah, who just tore them down.
Mm-hmm.
But that's indicative of most kings in the Bible, unfortunately. So, most kings were, if they weren't necessarily participating in idol worship themselves, were complacent in it. So, but
They kind of lived in their own little world, didn't they?
yeah,
And ignored what was going on around them.
yeah, that's a good way to put it, I think. Yeah. Okay, Ahaz is number 3, and this is 2 Chronicles 28. So you can see the pattern here where you just, one chapter is one king, go to the next chapter. That's another king, go to the next chapter. 2 Chronicles 28 verses 1 through 4 is your first bullet point. So that reads, Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. Unlike David his father, he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He followed the ways of the king of Israel, and also made idols for worshipping the Baals. He burned sacrifices in the valley of Ben Hinnom, and sacrificed his children in the fire, engaging in the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. He offered sacrifices and burned incense at the high places, on the hilltops, and under every spreading tree. So that was 2 Chronicles 28, 1 through 4, if you missed that. So yeah, not only is this dude making pagan sacrifices, it says he altered his children on a fire. So, it was like we were about 50-50 with Uzziah, and then we kind of swung the other way, and it was like, Jotham's pretty good. And then now we're just as far this way, just about as we can get. If one side is good king and the other side is bad king, we're just about as far bad as you can get, it seems like.
So this David they're referring to is the David, right?
Unlike David, his father, he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. Yes. I mean, obviously not like father like we would think of it, but yeah, basically. Great granddaddy, basically.
Okay.
Interesting to note, when you are studying the Old Testament, is especially a word like begot. So like you read the genealogies in Genesis, does not necessarily mean like immediate descendant. So like, I don't know, Methuselah begat so-and-so. Could mean like my dad begat me, as weird as it sounds to say that. Or it could mean like my great-great-grandpa begat me, And in Hebrew reckoning, it's all kind of the same in terms of how that word is used.
But he was a descendant of David.
Yes. So anyway, so yeah, son of David. I mean, Jesus is also called the son of David, but so. Second, B is 2 Chronicles 28, 22 to 25. In his time of trouble, King Ahaz became even more unfaithful to the Lord. He offered sacrifices to the gods of Damascus, who had defeated him, for he thought, since the gods of the kings of Aram have helped them, I will sacrifice to them so they will help me. But they were his downfall and the downfall of all Israel. Ahaz gathered together the furnishings from the temple of God and cut them in pieces. He shut the doors of the Lord's temple and set up altars at every street corner in Jerusalem. In every town in Judah he built high places to burn sacrifices to other gods and arouse the anger of the Lord, the God of his ancestors. So this directly leads into the religious reform of Hezekiah. Putting up all of these, it says an altar at every street corner in Jerusalem. Talks about gathering the furnishings of the temple and cutting them, shutting the doors of the temple. This is all going to be reversed one generation later, right? And we'll see that here when we talk about Hezekiah. So Hezekiah, your verse there, we're in Kings now, 2 Kings 18, 9 through 10. and this is not necessarily about Hezekiah as a good king or a bad king, but I threw this in there for fun. It says, oh wait, yeah, flip there if you want to. I will give you a moment. 2 Kings 18, 9 through 10.
I was thinking, this Bible has a thing about the kings, and it shows how they come in line and everything. So if you look in your Bible, you might have a chart like that,
Yeah.
and you can see where they are and when they reigned. And
What was it again? 2 Kings
18.
18.
9 through 10. So, okay. So, in Hezekiah's 4th year as a king, and then in parentheses, which was the 7th year in the reign of King Hosea, son of Elah of Israel, King Shalmaneser of Assyria attacked Samaria, blockaded it, and captured it at the end of 3 years. Samaria was taken in Hezekiah's 6th year as king, which was Hosea's 9th year as king of Israel. So I threw this in here kind of for fun, because you're going to notice a little bit of a problem if you go back to your notes from week 1, because both of the sources of dating the kings that we used, right? One was traditionally thought of as like the best, and then another guy came along and he's kind of been held in higher regard as probably closer to accurate, but the other guy, we still like him as well. Both of which very academic, very scholarly. Both of them agreed. They didn't agree on a lot, but both of them agreed on Hezekiah that he started ruling in 715 or 716 BC. Okay? But it just said in 2 Kings that Hezekiah witnessed the fall of Samaria, which happened in 721 BC. And not only that, but that it happened in his 4th year as king. Well, that's when it started, and then ultimately fell in his 6th year as king. So I threw that in there kind of for fun, and I'm not going to get into that a whole lot. Simple answer, we don't really know the chronology of the kings. If that wasn't apparent from when we covered chapter 1, it should be more apparent now. And we also don't entirely know the chronology even of when Samaria fell. 721 or 720, people say. People even bump it up a little bit more and say it was earlier than that. We don't entirely know. There wasn't exactly the History Channel back then to document this kind of stuff. But, the main thing that I think is at stake here is you're either going to date the beginning of Hezekiah's reign in relationship to the fall of Samaria. So, okay, if Samaria fell in 721 or 722, then Hezekiah's reign had to have started in 728 or 727 BC. But it also says that Hezekiah was present when Assyria tried to take Jerusalem. Because if you remembered, they took Samaria and they took the northern kingdom, but then they got greedy. They tried to go for Jerusalem. And that's when that miracle happened where the angel just came in at night and just kind of killed them all. And then that was it. They all were just dead and Assyria went home defeated. And that happened in 701. So if you date Hezekiah's reign beginning at 728 to match up with 2 Kings, then it doesn't line up with the 701 date of when Jerusalem would have been surrounded. And if you date it when, according to when Jerusalem would have been surrounded in 701, then it doesn't line up with when Samaria fell. So either way, historically, you have a problem with dating Hezekiah's reign. And I only say that because we're dealing with Hosea, who is before the fall of Samaria. But he also lists Hezekiah as, I was prophesying in the days of Hezekiah. So Hezekiah was probably at the very tail end of, he's in the South, obviously, but he was probably, came to power at the very tail end of the North. And I don't know when that was, but in terms of the chronology of the events, I don't really know. Did Samaria fall later than we thought? Was Jerusalem surrounded earlier than we thought? Did Samaria fall twice, as some historians think? I don't know. But there is a dating issue there. All right, B and C are really the main points of emphasis. So B is 2 Chronicles 29. So we did 2 Chronicles 26, we did 27, we did 28. Now we're on 29 with Hezekiah. 29, 1 through 11. This is pretty lengthy, and I'm not going to read it all because, time. But this is Hezekiah's religious reform. And if you notice, right, the shutting up the temples, it specifically says, right, he reverses that. The altars, right, he reverses that. And so you have a lot of the reversal of what you saw with Ahaz, one generation previously. So that's 2 Chronicles 29, 1 to 11. And then 2 Chronicles 32, 24 to 26. 2 Chronicles 32, 24 to 26. That's your last, that's C under Hezekiah. And I'll read that because it's pretty short. In those days, Hezekiah became ill and was at the point of death. He prayed to the Lord, who answered him and gave him a miraculous sign. But Hezekiah's heart was proud, and he did not respond to the kindness shown him. Therefore the Lord's wrath was on him and on Judah and Jerusalem. Then Hezekiah repented of the pride of his heart, as did the people of Jerusalem. Therefore the Lord's wrath did not come on them during the days of Hezekiah. So Hezekiah was a good king. And, because of his religious reforms, other people turned to God as well. And even though later on, Hezekiah, it says he was proud and he did not respond to the kindness shown to him, what happened? He repented. And not only that, but the people repented as well. So Hezekiah, he's a pretty good king. If you had to rank them, in terms of best to worst, he's probably at the top, at least in terms of what we've talked about tonight. So recapping, Uzziah, he started out good, he became bad. Jotham was pretty much good all the way through. I mean, we said he was complicit in idolatry among the people, but at least in terms of the biblical narrative of 2 Chronicles, he's called pretty good. Ahaz was bad all the way through his life. And then Hezekiah and the common people were good pretty much throughout his entire reign, except for that, there's that one little slip up that he had, but he repented, so all is forgiven. So now comes the question, okay, where are we at in Hosea 11 in terms of history, right? Because, Hezekiah, not only the king, but also the people are doing pretty good. Also, like we said, Hezekiah was for the most part after the fall of Samaria, which would be after when Hosea is writing this. So we can pretty much determine we're not dealing with the time of Hezekiah. If I had to guess, I would say probably dealing with Ahaz. Because, Ahaz is the dude, I had it. He burned sacrifices and sacrificed his children in the fire, engaging in the detestable practices of the nations. So, probably in the time of Ahaz is what I would guess, but, that's me, that's not Bible. But there are important points of emphasis here beyond pointing out the South's covenantal failures as well as the North's. And different commentators have pointed out a couple of these. The first is the Southern Kingdom had the legitimate place of worship. Okay? Because, we talked about the north, King Jeroboam, well, we don't want to make the people go to Jerusalem. We'll make our own Jerusalem. We don't want the people to, celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. We'll have our own Feast of Tabernacles, right? And how even if they were doing the worship of God, there wasn't any paganism involved, there was no syncretism of true religion and false religion, it would still be wrong because it wasn't in Jerusalem like the Lord had commanded. Judah, on the other hand, right, all these are southern kings, Judah did have Jerusalem. They did have the proper location of legitimate worship. And they still resorted to paganism. They still resorted to idol worship and syncretism and all the stuff that we've been talking about for the last, several months that we've been in this book, it seems like. So, even with the proper locations of worship, Judah is still just as guilty, if not more, of paganism than the northern kingdom is. Second, God is the only one who is faithful here in this verse, 11:12. If the NIV is correct, which I think it is, then the point is that Ephraim or Israel is deceitful, Judah is unruly, but the Holy One is faithful, right? The emphasis becomes on the faithfulness of God. Now, I say that, and then the next thing I'm going to say is going to kind of walk back and kind of go against that. But that's kind of the fun thing about pulling all these different points of emphasis is that, well, if it's translated this way, then this is an emphasis. And if it's translated this way, then this is an emphasis. But either way, God's saying something cool. But if the NIV is correct, then the emphasis is on, okay, well, you have, let me go back up here. You have Judah, they're unruly against God. You have Ephraim, they've encircled me with lies and with deceit. But, the Holy One is faithful. Okay, third, real quick. Judah is syncretizing religion as well. And this is different from your first point, because your first point was all about Judah had Jerusalem, they had the temple, they had, all the proper modes of worship. But this goes back to getting a little bit technical here. The wording that is potentially used in this verse. So the word that's translated is God. Judah, I'm reading from the New King James because that's what I have in front of me. Judah still walks with God. So that word that's translated as God is El, right? I think Lester this morning mentioned Elohim, right? El is often just translated as God. But in addition to being the name of Yahweh, it's also the name of a Canaanite god, right? You can Google El God, E-L God, and what will likely pull up is El, the Canaanite god, the father of the gods, right? God above gods. And so it makes a lot of sense because depending on, how the language came about, because, the Canaanites and the Hebrews, they're all Semitic languages. Either God is basically claiming this name for himself because he's saying, no, I'm the father of the gods. I'm the God above gods, right? Lord of lords, King of kings, God of gods, essentially. Or you had the Canaanite religion that basically stole it from the Hebrews, which sounds more spiritual, but yeah, we don't really know which is the case. And they basically gave that to their highest deity in their pantheon, and they said, well, Yahweh's not the God above gods. El, the God above gods, is the God above gods. And so, either way, the point is, El can be translated as, or can mean the Canaanite God. And in other places in the Bible, it will read as lower G gods. Even in the Minor Prophets, I think Micah or maybe Malachi, it's one of the ones with an M, probably Micah. It just translates it with the lowercase g. Lowercase g gods. So basically, then the emphasis is that Judah, like their northern neighbors, is syncretizing, okay, true worship, Elohim, pagan worship, El, the Canaanite false god. Also, the term Holy One could also be Holy Ones and could be a reference to the Canaanite pantheon. I don't know, but, possibly. So basically, Judah, they worship Yahweh under names that might be associated with Orthodox Yahwehism, but which already indicate a turning away into the language of the Canaanite cults. That's a quote. So, in other words, right, the religious syncretism we've been talking about. Ephraim's encircled me with lies, the house of Israel deceit. Judah, right? This is confusing because I'm reading this out of the New King James, but I'm arguing for the NIV. If Judah is unruly against El, or also sort of walks with El, then, okay, it's not that they're unruly against Yahweh. It's that, right, they're committing idolatry. They're committing paganism. Even unruly against the faithful ones, right, then the entire host of false gods of the, Canaanites, they're being swept up under that as well. Basically going in and either praying to Yahweh, using El like you would refer to Yahweh, but worshiping pagan gods, or worshiping pagan gods using El like you would refer to God like Elohim. Something along those lines would be what would be going on here. So, okay, verses 3 through 5. This is where we actually get into chapter 12, and things will move a little bit faster now. This is all references to Jacob. He took his brother by the heel in the womb. He strengthened the struggle. In his strength, he struggled with God. He found God in Bethel. So again, all references to Jacob. And all you have to do for 1 and 2 is verses. Just write down verse references. So Jacob grabbed the heel of his brother Esau in the womb. That's from Genesis 25. Not going to turn there, but, for your own edification, I'm sure you'll want to go refresh your memory on that when you get home. Jacob wrestled with God. That's from Genesis 32. And so these moments are more connected than you might think, because they both show the reasoning behind both of Jacob's names, right? He was named Jacob because he grabbed onto the heel of Esau. He was given the new name Israel because he wrestled with God. So the names aren't, if you look into, if you were to look at the Hebrew, the actual word for wrestled or, to grab the heel is not the same as Jacob or Israel, but they sound the same. They sound similar, even though they're not linguistically related necessarily. So you have Jacob or Jacob in Hebrew, and to grasp the heel would be something like Ba'akep. Yakep, Ba'akep. You can kind of hear the similarities there. Similarly, Yisrael for Israel, and Sarah for to wrestle with, or to wrestle with, or something like that. So Yisra Sarah, right? So you can kind of hear the similarity there. But there's another name in these list of verses, 3 through 5, that's presented in this section. And that is, if you're in the New King James, it will be in all capitals. I'm not as familiar with like the NIV as I am the New King James in terms of how they present the names of God. But in verse 5, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, Lord God of hosts. Anytime you see that, at least in the New King James, that's always Yahweh. That's always the covenantal name of God. Yahweh. So, right, Yahweh, Jacob found Yahweh in Bethel. And God revealed himself as Yahweh, right, in Genesis chapter 28. And what he actually says is he gives both of his names. He says, I am the Lord, Yahweh, the God, Elohe of Abraham. So he actually uses his covenantal name and his less formal name in Genesis 28 at Bethel. But even after Jacob is given his new name of Israel in Genesis 35, Jacob again meets God at Bethel, but the name of Yahweh is not used. So the name of Yahweh, Jacob in Bethel, is only used in Genesis 28. So that's definitely when in verse 5, it talks about, verse 4, he found him in Bethel, and there he spoke to us. That is the Lord God of hosts. The incident that it's referring to is the first time in Genesis 28. That's Jacob's ladder, Jacob's dream. You have God giving his covenantal name, Yahweh, to Jacob. And what are we to make about all this, except for the fact that God has a lot of names? If Judah is being called out for religious syncretism, just like the northern kingdom is, right? We talked about that with 11:12. So if that's the case, and part of that includes using, again, either the names of pagan gods in the worship of Yahweh or the name of Yahweh in the worship of pagan gods. If all that is the case, then God is reaffirming his covenantal name, which is, this is your blank, Yahweh. Yahweh. And he's reminding both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom of when they, the covenantal people, came into being. So Yahweh and then the covenantal people. This is significant. While you're writing, this is significant because all of Israel can trace itself back to Abraham, yes, but right, it all really got kicked off with Jacob. Jacob, and then the 12 sons, the 12 tribes, and those were the children of Israel. And so God is reaffirming his covenantal name, right? I've already revealed myself to you when I revealed myself to Jacob. In the same moment, the same vision where I promised Jacob that, right, I would give him, descendants as numerous as the dust or whatever. It's all in Genesis 28. And so that same moment when God, confirms that, okay, the blessing of, that was originally given to Abraham has now been passed to Jacob. When God was affirming that and promising Jacob descendants, he gave his name of Yahweh. And so right now, the people of Judah, right? Okay, if they're being called out for this sort of misuse of God's name, then God is saying, hey, I've already given you my name. It's Yahweh, and I gave it to you. Jacob found me in Bethel, which, by the way, is where all of y'all came from. So pretty significant there. Pretty, there's a that hits close to home if you're listening to this as an Israelite. Okay, verse 9. I want to get into this, even though we kind of already talked about the Festival of Tabernacles back in verse 9. In chapter 9, in chapter 9, verses 1 through 3, you saw the reversal of the Feast of Tabernacles, right? No rejoicing, no dwelling, no sacrifices, right? And what did we say? All of that could only mean exile, right? Well, now in verse 9 of chapter 12, it kind of makes me out to be a liar because it says, I am the Lord your God ever since the land of Egypt. I will again make you dwell in tents as in the days of the appointed feast. So was I just like completely off base when I covered chapter 9? Well, no. There's just sort of two different things that are being emphasized here. The feast itself will be over because the people will be in exile, right? There ain't going to be no rejoicing. There ain't going to be no sacrifices. And there ain't going to be no dwelling in tents in Jerusalem because you're going to be in exile. That's all from chapter 9. But think back to why the festival was instituted in the first place and what the festival commemorated. And so when it just says see, right, Leviticus 23, 42 and 43. And this is all about what the Festival of Tabernacles was even supposed to mean. Leviticus 23, 42 to 43. It says, live in temporary shelters for 7 days. All native-born Israelites are to live in such shelters, so your descendants will know that I had the Israelites live in temporary shelters when I brought them out of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So the point of the Festival of Tabernacles was to commemorate the Exodus wandering, right? Okay, well, we left Egypt. We're not quite in the promised land yet, so there's no point in building a house. We're going to just live in tents for 40 years. In hindsight, if they would have known it was going to be 40 years, they might have built a house. I don't know. They might have settled down. But, you're living in tents, at least for the beginning period anyway. Wandering around. You don't have a home, right? They were without a home. And so in Hosea chapter 12, God's basically saying, okay, Israel, you're going to be without a home once again, right? And so this is your fill in the blank. Really, what Hosea is prophesying here is not a reversal of the Festival of Tabernacles like it was in chapter 12. Really, it's a reversal of the conquest of the promised land, right? Because the whole point, okay, instead of going into the promised land and dwelling there permanently, right? I got a house, I got my 20 acres, instead of that, now I'm going to be exiled out of the promised land, right? To Assyria or to another country, right? And I'm going to be without a home. I'm going to be without a place to call my own. And for some of these people, kind of sort of the same situation, just sort of shuffled around from place to place without any form of, long residency. So in addition to calling Israel back to their establishment as a people at Bethel that we saw in verse 5 and verse 4, God also calls Israel back to the establishment of their homeland, right? So you have, okay, remember when I gave you my covenantal name and I promised Jacob that he would have descendants and that he would have a nation, right? Well, also, remember when I brought you out of Egypt, but before I brought you into your homeland, right? So it's calling back to the establishment of the homeland, and it's basically saying that this will be reversed or taken away from them, right? They're going to be plucked out of Israel. They're going to go to Assyria. They're going to go to some other nation, because some of them were just straight up like sold as slaves, so they didn't go to Assyria. They went to who knows where. And just all over the place without a home. Much like, Egypt, for as terrible situation as it was home, right? you were always in the same spot, right? It wasn't good, but it was home. And so in a way, you can almost kind of understand in human terms why the Israelites were so cranky and why they sometimes wanted to go back to Egypt, because it was less chaotic in the sense that there was some sense of stability in Egypt. After they were out of Egypt, there was like no stability in terms of residency. They were living in tents, they were moving, right? God is saying that's what it's going to be like once again. Okay, very quickly, verses 12 through 14. Hosea again brings up more incidents from the nation's past. So you have Jacob. He fled to the country of Syria. That is Genesis 27, verses 42 to 45. Genesis 27, 42 to 45. So this is after he cheated Esau, and Jacob's mama's boy. Mama says, "Hey, go to your, I should know this, uncle, I think, whatever, Laban, and he'll take you in. You can basically be a refugee there for a little bit. All this will die down. Esau will get over it, move on, and then you can come home." And so that's what that's in reference to. Second bullet point: Jacob served as a shepherd for a spouse. That's Genesis 29, right? So he gets there and he goes to Laban, and I like this one girl, but you gave me this other one instead, so I'm going to serve you for like however many years as a shepherd, so I can get 2 wives, because that's a logical thing to do. That's Genesis 29. And then by a prophet, Moses, the prophet being Moses, Israel was led out of Egypt and was preserved. That is Exodus 14. That's just the Exodus narrative. So Genesis 27, Genesis 29, and Exodus 14. Commentators point out a couple points of emphasis. Kind of the same thing as what we did with 11, 12, the 3 bullet points there, except we have 4. Hosea, I always say that like Hosea. I say it like with a Spanish accent almost, like Jose. Hosea likens Jacob as a literal shepherd, because Jacob had flocks, had sheep. Hosea likened Jacob to a literal shepherd, to Moses, who led Israel out of Egypt. So Jacob was an actual shepherd, and Moses, was, for a little bit a shepherd, but, in Hosea 12, more metaphorically, led Israel out of Egypt, like a shepherd would lead his flocks. So then Ephraim, or Israel, has disregarded and left the shepherd. So disregarded the shepherd or left the shepherd, and then that incurs God's wrath. Right? And you see that in verse 14. The Lord will leave the guilt of his bloodshed upon him and return his reproach upon him. So, number 2, both Haran and Egypt were originally intended to be peaceful places to live, right? If you remember, originally Egypt was a good thing, right? There's this famine, but we can go down to Egypt, and Joseph's in charge there, and he'll give us food, and he'll make sure we're taken care of. And living in Egypt was a good thing originally, right? Same way with, Haran and living with Laban, right? I guess this is more good in human terms, because I don't know that it's a good thing to necessarily cheat your brother and then run away from that. But in human terms, it was a good thing, right? Oh, I can go here. I can hide out for a little bit. And once this whole thing dies down a bit, I can go home, right? They were both originally intended to be peaceful places to live, but Laban deceived Jacob. And a new Pharaoh hated the Hebrews, which were Jacob's descendants. Number 3, both Jacob and his descendants, I completely mistyped that. Both Jacob and his descendants left with wealth. Plundering the Egyptians is maybe not so much in secular circles, but, in Christian or just religious circles, that's sort of a catchphrase of you're leaving somewhere better off than you came in, basically. Plundering the Egyptians, plundering Egypt, and then obviously, Jacob was loaded down with all sorts of stuff when he, eventually went back and met his brother. So, number 4, in rejecting Hosea, the people were also rejecting Moses. So in rejecting Hosea, the people were also rejecting Moses. And that is a direct quote, by the way. That's why it's in parentheses or quotes. So, yeah, you have potentially Judah, definitely, because I do, and many people think the NIV is correct, or at least more correct than the New King James. Judah is definitely being called out in addition to Israel. But potentially you have them being called out for misuse of God's name. Then you get into 3, 4, and 5, and you have, okay, well, I gave you my name at Bethel, right? Jacob got his first name because he held on to the heel. He got the name Israel because he wrestled with God. Jacob also was introduced to my name, right? Yahweh, at Bethel, the same place that it was foretold that Israel would even be a thing, right? So you have that going on. Going into verse 9, right? It's a reversal of the conquest, right? So, okay, well, prophesying that you're going to have, that Jacob is going to have descendants, that there's going to be this large nation. Well, nation needs a homeland. So, right, God brings them out of Egypt. There's the whole conquest of Canaan. And then now it's basically a reversal of that, where instead of being the conquerors, they're going to be the conquered. And they're going to be exiled out of that homeland. And then getting on into 12, 13, and 14, you have, once again, references to Jacob. And Jacob was a shepherd, in a pretty literal sense. Moses was a shepherd, in a more figurative sense. And he led the people out of Egypt. But ultimately, I think point 4 is probably the most significant in, right, rejecting the words of Hosea. The people are like the sheep, and they just, are leaving the shepherd. And they're ultimately leaving Moses, right? And Jacob, for that matter. Neither Jacob nor Moses would have approved of what was going on, basically. So anyway, that is chapter 12. Two more chapters. So we'll be done here in a couple weeks, if not sooner, depending on if I fill in another Sunday. Any questions or anything that was missed? Okay. I did actually think ahead to bring a prayer request sheet, and then I left it in my office. But this one is probably up to date. So,
Here's today's if you want to be sure.
Yeah, let me just.
There.
Okay, this is probably last week's because it talks about the storm damage.
Well, we repeated ourselves this week on the storm damage.
Yeah. I think I'm only a week behind, so there shouldn't be a whole lot different. Appreciate it though.
Just remember Lester for sure.
Yes. Lester is never going to be the guy that puts himself on the prayer list. I think he could. I think Lester could die, and he would come back from the grave to tell us, "Don't put it on. Don't put his." I don't know. Maybe he'd say, "Put my loved ones on there," but he will never put himself on the prayer list. But yeah, definitely pray for him. Especially, I mean, yeah, he already out of the box this morning, out of the gate, he told me just wore out. He said he was doing pretty good, I guess, up until like Friday or maybe Saturday. And then he just said he's been like real wore out. So he is starting rehab, I guess, this week. And he called me. He called the church. I think he tried to call me and my phone was on silent, which it always is. And so then he called the church phone and I was here. And he told me he was going to try to get hold of his heart doctor or his cardiologist, which is heart doctor. So I'm assuming in the next week, he'll probably know more about, okay, is this something that is just going to be what it is forever? Or is this something that we can kind of mitigate to some degree? Or, but right now there's a lot of uncertainty. And so this might be the new normal for Lester, where he just gets wore out a lot.
And his heart was damaged, so we have to realize that it's probably going to be a permanent situation, whatever.
Yeah, when I went to see him in the hospital, and he said, which I think I've said this before, but he said his heart was at about like 45% or 40% or something of like where like 100% I guess would be like, I'm running a marathon or something. 0% being dead. And his was like at 40 or 45 or something. And he said, which obviously, that's not great. But he said, oh, you can live off of like 30%. So he saw it as like a positive thing. I don't know that I would frame it quite that way. But yeah, his heart was damaged, which, yeah, you can't really have a heart attack and not get heart damage. It's just a matter of, was the damage bad enough that this is just the way it is? Or is it something that over time maybe it'll kind of get better? Or is there some way to like mitigate the getting wore out so easily? And like I said, I mean, he's starting rehab and he said he was going to call his cardiologist. So I'm assuming
it will be hard to start rehab when you feel like that, like he did today.
Yeah.
It will.
Yeah. I don't even know. That pray for the rehab in addition to everything else. Yeah.
Well, it takes a while just to get over a heart attack.
Don told me
even.
that the doctors had kind of mentioned to him that he might feel some extra tiredness type stuff, and that's what he's feeling, really tired.
He just needs to pace himself a little better, maybe.
Yeah. He's stubborn. I don't know. That's the only way to put it. But we love him, but he's stubborn.
He's so good. he just likes to keep after it.
He's not watching right now, but I wish he was.
Oh. You get an earful,
Okay. Wrong paper. So see, I had one that like had stuff marked that like Lester wanted me to mention. We had a couple people come up on the prayer thing yesterday. Who someone that used to go here died.
He didn't go. Wasn't he? And
That
it was
was
Mary
Kellis.
West singing group.
Kellis Brown.
Kellis
Yeah.
Brown.
Yeah,
The very last one on the last column.
yeah, that's the one.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, mine's a week old. So anyway.
You want this?
Well, I thought surely in 1 week there couldn't be that much difference.
Passed away?
Yeah.
Last night, yeah.
You remember him? Yes. I think he was really good. And he had a voice that he could go way up high.
Mm-hmm. They were a good group back
They
then.
were.
Mm-hmm.
They sure were.
Do pray for the storm damage because that's kind of in that same area. I drove out yesterday out by First Baptist, and then there's a mobile home community kind of in that same area. It's a little bit further back. And my dad's church was sort of a Red Cross shelter for about 3 days. And my dad drove a lady from the Red Cross shelter back home. She wasn't going home to stay. She was, I guess, going there to get something and then going to her relatives. But her mobile home in this mobile home park was like almost completely destroyed. Like there was like almost nothing left of it. And what was crazy is that the woman was in the house when the tornado went through, and she was like perfectly fine. You know, like herself was perfectly fine.
Wow.
Crazy story. But I actually drove by there, and my dad pointed out like which house it was. It was like it was crazy. Yeah.
Miracle.
There was another one that like a tree fell and just basically split it right in half. So there's a lot of people. There was a lot of just like, because there's that whole like business strip area. And so a lot of them had minor damages, like signs were knocked over, or there were like a little bit of the roof was tarped. And then you get into some of the residential neighborhoods, and especially like obviously mobile homes are always going to take storm damage worse than, you know, a home on a foundation.
Yeah,
But I mean, some of those were like, you know, you pray no one was inside of it, which I guess I haven't heard that anyone from Claremore died. So, I mean, that is a miracle kind of in itself.
So much of the damage in those neighborhoods was from the big trees, because that's an old neighborhood, from the big trees that caused damage to the houses.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
in fact, they have a large population, so I understand, of elderly people, and they have a big senior population, in other words. And John O'Connor, you know, my grandson's mother-in-law lives over there in Claremore, and my stepdaughter Connie went to check on her because they live in Texas and they didn't know how she was doing. And when they got over there, she was just sitting in the dark, kind of vegetating, hadn't eaten. She was in La La Land from the storm, and her refrigerator was full of spoiled food. She hadn't eaten or drinking probably 3 or 4 days, how long it's been. And so they just grabbed her up and took her home with them because she could not stay there under those conditions.
yeah.
And so, and
she
she's
was in
not
shock.
Yeah, she's not the only one. She was definitely in shock, and she hadn't eaten or drank, or she hadn't taken her medicine or anything.
A lot of people that were not really touched by the storm have been without electricity for
a long time.
Week.
For a long time.
Our
Yeah.
friends have been without.
I guess she's
Still
doing a little
fine.
better as of yesterday,
Yeah.
but there for a while they thought they were going to have to take her to a hospital because she was not doing well at all. She didn't know where she was at, or when she had eaten, or when she took her medicine or anything. So I'm sure she's not the only one. You know.
Yeah.
I think we should praise God for all the response from organizations, from just ordinary people,
Yeah.
Yes.
from schools.
They have all jumped in to help.
Everyone is. I saw the Samaritan's Purse trailer there parked at the Methodist Church. That's as far as I got. Ready to go downtown.
Yes. There was Yeah, just Samaritan's Purse. That's the Billy Graham.
Yes.
Yeah. I think I did get like an email thing about that. So
It's kind of strange to me that the TV stations are not really telling how bad it really is over there. At least I don't think they are.
Well, and they're not giving credit to all the people who are helping either. Because there was a whole bunch of kids from Sequoia School that went in and helped, and all they talked about was Claremore kids.
yeah,
That's strange why they would do that.
Oh, it's the news media.
It
Why
must
do
be
they do anything?
political type stuff, I guess.
the thing about news is that anxiety and depression sells more than happiness. You know, and you get that in traditional media. Social media is like one of the worst offenders of this, because you can post, you know, I love the current state of our government, and I love the current state of our world and our society, and everything is great. And everyone ignores that. But if you post, you know, the president is the Antichrist and all of our children are being sacrificed to Moloch or something, which I'm not saying that's the case, but, you know, then all of a sudden, you know, you'll get, 10,000 retweets or whatever because, people
Sales.
almost, I think, want to be worried or upset about something. And it's the same way with the news. You know, you're going to have reports on, when the tornado is happening, and but you're not necessarily going to get, oh, here's all the people that helped after the tornado. And
Shame.
yeah, I mean, and that's the same way with a lot of things, unfortunately. Anyway, we have like how many pregnancies left? Like 5.
Yes, and keep my granddaughter Anna in your prayers.
She's getting close, isn't she?
She could deliver any time,
Anytime.
but she has another problem with her ex-husband. They're not agreeing on the terms of the divorce, so pray for that.
Goodness.
I just thought of some. VBS is next week, so it does not seem like it should be June, but it is.
Today's the second this week.
It is.
In our class. Was that you? Yeah, Barbara's going to be a new great grandmother.
Are you?
Good.
It's November.
November, yeah.
What are the parents' names?
Pardon?
What are the parents' names?
Tyler and Brianna. Brianna, excuse me. Like,
It's great. And they don't know what it is yet.
when the big test comes through where they turn the baby every which way but loose to figure out if it's okay, then they'll find out, which will be soon.
I'll add them to our list.
There was one thing that Lester wanted